Hey, what's going on, gang? Nate on the Stone here. Welcome back to my channel. It is good to be back with another edition of the Rolling Stone. We've been on a little unplanned hiatus, but we are back and we are ready to start talking about all of the insane things that are happening in our world today. The insane and at the same time completely serious things that are happening, because something that everyone has to keep in mind, gang, everything that the postmodern American and more in general Western left says and does, it believes and it does for a purpose. So let's just take our first story as sort of a microcosm of that. This story comes from Vox. We've talked about it before. Very left-leaning website that tries to pose as sort of a centrist website in some ways. The headline of this particular story reads thus: the anti-American right, rooting against Olympians, scoffing at Capitol Police, broaching civil war, meet today's conservative movement. Now let me read to you guys a few excerpts from this piece because it's gold. All right. Conservative anti-Americanism still pays lip service to love of country. Its proponents declare themselves the true patriots, describing their enemies as the nation's betrayers. But when the cadre of traitors includes everyone from election administrators to Olympians to the Capitol Police, it becomes clear that the only America they love is the one that exists in their heads. When they contemplate the actual United States, the real America, if you will, they are filled with scorn. And that's really, in a nutshell, the point of view, the POV that Zach Beauchamp, the writer, Zach Beauchamp, sounds like a French name, probably it is, although if it's French, he has to give up his French privilege because he's just, descended from Europeans, which means that he's automatically racist. So I have no idea why he's still writing for Vox when his position could be given to a BIPOC. But what do I know? That is really, that paragraph that I just read to you is, in a nutshell, the main theme, the driving force of Beauchamp's piece here. Because people on the right are criticizing American Olympians, because they are casting doubt as to the narratives that are being recounted and recalled by Capitol Hill Police, now that Congress has actually started this completely farce January 6th committee to examine the quote-unquote insurrection that happened that day. And because, of course, the right is all for the January 6th riot, quote-unquote insurrection, which means that it's all for civil war, this means that the right no longer loves America. And in fact, it is the implication here that Beauchamp gives is that the right is the enemy of America. And that's really important, and we'll come back to that in a second. But those are really the three facets by which he distills his thesis: Olympians, Capitol Police, and January 6th. So, for example, he says, the Olympics have brought out this sense of alienation from America on the right. When conservatives see American athletes representing values at odds with their vision for the country, they don't back Team USA in the name of patriotism. They turn on the icons of the nation itself. Queer female soccer stars demanding equal pay, black basketball players kneeling to protest police brutality, the world's best gymnast prioritizing her mental health over upholding the tradition ideal of the tough athlete. This is all a manifestation of the ascendancy of liberal culture values in public life, and in America where these values permeate national symbols like the Olympic team is an America where those symbols are worthy of scorn. And he goes on to say the same thing about the Capitol Police, etc., and how could people possibly cast doubt on what the Capitol Police are saying. Now let's get some of the low-hanging fruit out of the way first. Let's take this paragraph that I just read to you about the Olympians, okay, just as an example. Because when you have athletes who are representing their country on an international stage, like all of these Olympians are, and then when they decide to use that international podium to actually protest the country that they claim to be representing, decent, patriotic Americans have every right to be offended and to be enraged and to not back those Olympians. Okay? Those people, those enraged Americans, they're not turning their back on the Olympic team. The Olympic team, or those Olympians, have already turned their back on their country. Because in the first place, the Olympics is not the place to protest. The Olympics is not the place to protest. Kathmandu, China, Indonesia, they could care less about what happens here in America. They could care less about what happens in the minutia of politics and events. The left is taking these events, like George Floyd's death, and they are making it as if it's a coming sign of the apocalypse, or it's the forerunner of the salvation of the world. Like George Floyd's death is the equivalent of John the Baptist crying out in the desert. The rest of the world doesn't care, because most of the rest of the world is simply trying to survive. So in the very first place, the Olympics is not the place to be protesting anything. The Olympics is the place to actually be competing with other nations. Second of all, when you actually turn your back, when you show disrespect to your nation, when you say, for example, when you don't just say, well, I'm competing for my people at home to show that everyone has a fair shot, to sort of imply that, which would be bad enough, but it would still be under the radar enough that you might be able to get away with it. But when you are actually turning your back on the national anthem and the flag, when you're kneeling for your own national anthem, which is one of the basic symbols of your country, you're not representing the country. You're not representing it. You are, in fact, disgracing it. You are trying to turn the honor that belongs to your country, the attention that is being given to your country in that international stage, onto yourself. That's what you're doing. It's all glory hogging. It's not about protesting. It's not about rights. It's not about justice or any of the other bull that they give. It's all about that. And again, to say something else, to add a third point to that, all of these things, all of these protests are based on lies. It would still be inappropriate, but it would be more understandable if there was actually something to protest. But what are they actually protesting? They're not protesting, they're protesting. They are not protesting, gang, actual injustices. They're not. For example, this idea of police brutality. Yes, there is police brutality. Is there a culture of police brutality? Actually not, because if you crunch the data, including that of Obama and Biden's own FBI, there is less chance of a police officer shooting a black suspect than shooting a white suspect. In fact, there is a greater chance for a black American to trip and fall down the stairs and break his neck than to be shot by the police. Under any circumstances. These are the things. It's not just that these people are protesting. These people are protesting not for the truth, not for justice. They are protesting to uphold a lie. And that's what's actually getting people enraged. And as we go to the Capitol Police, who are now testifying before this January 6th committee, people again have every single right to be mad and to cast doubt on what they said. There is a great piece in American Greatness magazine by Julie Kelly. It was published on August 2nd about the Capitol Police. The headline is "Another Partisan Stunt by the U.S. Capitol Police." This is how her essay begins. Harry Dunn began his testimony last week before the January 6th Select Committee by asking for a moment of silence in honor of Brian Sicknick. The U.S. Capitol Police officer testifying under oath claimed his, quote, fallen colleague died from injuries he sustained in the line of duty defending the capital of our beloved democracy, unquote. The committee members and the audience complied. Dunn's remark, quite simply, is a lie. Brian Sicknick, 42, died on January 7th of a stroke caused by blood clots near his brain, a tragic and untimely death that the District of Columbia medical examiner did not tie to the events of the previous day. It is just the latest example of how U.S. Capitol Police, a federal agency funded by American taxpayers, has taken a leading role in fabricating the mythology of January 6th. I would disagree about the use of the word mythology there, but you get the point. When people like Harry Dunn permeates the lie that has now actually been debunked several times. In fact, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they have all had to very subtly retcon their previous pieces. They have all had to give very subtle retractions now that the DC Medical Examiner's report was made public and said, yeah, Brian Sicknick didn't die by being beamed on the head with a fire extinguisher. He died the next day of a stroke caused by a blood clot near the back of his brain that had absolutely nothing to do with anything that he did on January 6th, and didn't have anything to do with what happened to him, anything that might have happened to him on January 6th. When people see that, they have every right. They don't just have a right to be enraged and to cast doubt on what this scumbag Dunn is actually saying to them. They have a duty to be outraged because this guy is testifying under oath. He's committing perjury. To be point blank about it, this guy is committing perjury, and every single one of those congressmen and every single one of those committee members knows it, because everyone knows that that's what the DC Medical Examiner's report actually said. The DC Medical Examiner's report, which was several months late, probably, I would guess, because they were trying to decide, well, gee whiz, can we fudge this report? Can we just kind of, keep it on the sidelines? Which they couldn't do because Sicknick had been made the martyr of January 6th. He had been cast as another George Floyd in a sense. And so they couldn't keep the DC medical report under wraps. They couldn't keep that autopsy report under wraps. That's just speculation, though, on my part. The long and the short of it is that when Zach Boucham says that the right now is anti-American because they're protesting Olympians, they're disparaging Capitol Police officers, it's bull. Because every decent, patriotic American has the duty, I would say, not just the right, but the duty to be enraged by these wanker Olympians and these wanker Capitol Police officers. But enough of the low-hanging fruit, gang. Let's get to the real meat of this issue. Is it not a curious thing that the postmodern American left is now disparaging the American right, the postmodern American right, for anti-Americanism, when anti-Americanism is the animating spirit of the left? Whether you're talking about the 1619 Project, whether you're talking about critical race theory, whether you're talking about really any of the iterations, the idea of the white cisgendered patriarchy, everything that the left does is animated by this intense hatred of everything that went into the founding of our country, the founding of Western civilization in general. This is why they're attacking, for example, classical music, because it's too white. This is why they're attacking literature. It's too white. It's too old-fashioned. It's too male-dominant. This is why you had to decolonize your bookshelves. This is why they're attacking the classics, the study of Rome and Greece. It's too white. It's too heteronormative. It's too it's not enough. It doesn't reflect enough of what we want the world to look like. Okay? It's not the real world at all. It doesn't reflect what they want to look like. The very people now who have made it their mission to hate the United States and Western civilization in general is now decrying the right for supposedly hating America. Oh, and by the way, the 1619 Project, the critical race theory, which again, if you take it to its logical conclusion, as Ibram Kendi has said, which is that any sort of disparities between ethnic groups has to be caused by racism. Absolutely has to be caused by racism. There's no other answer for it. It's just racism, plain and simple. Those ideas are now raining down from the clouds of academia to the topsoil, as it were, of American life. Give you an example. The town of Evanston, Illinois, they had a municipal parade for Juneteenth. They had a municipal parade for Pride. They did not have a municipal parade for Independence Day. Oh, no, we can't. We can't possibly have a parade on Independence Day because with COVID and the pandemic and Delta variant and everything, it's just too dangerous. Just not safe enough. We wouldn't be responsible if we didn't actually make everything digital for Independence Day, where we can all socially distance and enjoy the festivities on our screens. Now, when that sort of thing happens, you know that the reason wasn't because of safety. It was because Pride and Juneteenth have more cultural significance, more cultural value. They have become institutions. When institution is defined as bedrock principles, first principles, you might say, institutions of the narrative. Independence Day no longer does anymore. The very same people who are saying that and who are cheering this on, the very same people who have said that there is no room for George Washington, there is no room for Abraham Lincoln, there is no room, the people who have do this experiment, gang, go to Google and in the Google search box type in we need a new constitution, okay, or a variation thereof, and you will have a bumper crop of articles, some published by Vox itself, saying that we need to scrap the entire U.S. Constitution. We don't just need to reform certain sections of it. We don't just need to add A, B, and C amendments to it. No, the whole thing needs to be dragged out, burned, and we need to start from scratch. Because, of course, the whole thing was created by white, straight, patriarchal, slave-holding males, and therefore it obviously is evil. These are the very same people who are now turning around and saying, well, because you're not celebrating the minutia, Olympic teams, police officers, you are anti-American. Now, we all know what this means. We all know what's going on here. If these Olympians were saying that America was the greatest country in the world, if these Capitol police officers were actually telling the truth about what happened on January 6th, because again, just a little fact, there are 14,000 hours of video footage from the Capitol on January 6th, none of which has been released to the public. So when these Capitol police officers start testifying to the committee, we have absolutely no idea if they're telling the truth or not. And if Harry Dunn is any example, I would bet that most of them aren't telling the truth. But be that as it may, the people now are telling us, the people who hate patriotism are now telling us that the minutia of patriotism is what matters. And it's even more insidious than that, game, because now what they are actually doing is they are redefining what it means to be an American. Because in their eyes, the gist of Beauchamp's piece is that you can only be a patriotic American if you actively celebrate anti-patriotic activity. Capitol police officers lying under oath. Olympians who turn their backs on the national anthem or who take a knee during the Pledge of Allegiance for a lie. That's very important to remember, for a lie. That is what defines a patriot now. That's what defines a true American. And this is going to put us on very, very dangerous ground, because once they redefine what an American is, and they do that totally, I mean, this has been going on for a long time. We have just reached the next stage of it. But when they actually redefine what an American is, then the people who dissent from the narrative, who will not actually condone the lies of the left, there's going to be nothing defending us, nothing protecting us, gang. How can where is your guarantee, the constitutional guarantee of free speech, or the guarantee that you can go to church, or that you can petition the government and assemble, if you're not an American? The argument will be that you're not an American, the Constitution doesn't apply to you. Where will equality before the law go? That's a big one. Where will equality before the law go when people who dissent from the left's lies are deemed anti-American, are deemed un-American? This is the end goal that the left wants. The left wants to weave this narrative so that when the time is right, they will legally be able to move against us. It won't be seen as tyranny. It won't be labeled as totalitarian thuggery. It will simply be upright, honest, bold, patriotic Americans saving their country from the fascists and the neo-Nazis and the Klansmen that are trying to rule the roost on their own. That's what the narrative is going to be. And Beauchamp's piece is just another shot into that narrative. That's what's going on, gang, and that is story number 1.